as the drums of war beat once again in the Middle East, Europe, and around the globe. Professor Michel Chossudovsky releases a new book on the globalization of war, detailing the possibility of nuclear conflict, the destabilization of sovereign countries, and how the people can awake from NATO's nightmare. This is the GRTV feature interview with your host James Corbett and our special guest, Michel Chossudovsky. Well, let's start to talk about your brand new book, which is now available from globalresearch.ca. It is, of course, called The Globalization of War, America's Long War Against Humanity. And this book breaks the concept of the globalization of war into the dangers of nuclear war, U.S. NATO-sponsored terrorism as a tool for destabilization of sovereign countries, and perhaps most importantly, reversing the tide of war. But let's start by talking about the reasons for writing this book now. What prompted you to start writing this book?
Well, essentially, this book, its intent is to break the consensus underlying the U.S. Military agenda, which is predicated on essentially on two concepts. One is the so-called global war on terrorism, in that the United States and its allies, including NATO and Israel, are waging a worldwide campaign against a jihadist movement, which incidentally was created by the United States. Okay, Al-Qaeda is a creation of the United States. So in other words, the world is led to believe somehow that the US is involved in military operations which are seeking to make peace and democracy, when in fact what is really happening is a war of conquest. So that peace, the concept of peace is undermined, war becomes peace, and the world is led to believe that war is a humanitarian undertaking. The book initiates the debate by looking at the history of war from the beginning of what is euphemistically called the post-war period. In other words, 1945 to present. But in fact, that period is characterized by a sequence of wars, both theater operations, military coups in Latin America and Southeast Asia, US-funded insurgencies, and so on and so forth. Essentially, we have now reached the pinnacle of a new crisis, whereby the United States is in fact threatening all major regions of the world. It's threatening China under the so-called pivot to Asia. It's threatening Russia through the militarization of Ukraine. It's involved in covert wars in sub-Saharan Africa, in Nigeria, in Somalia, and essentially we have the contours of what we can describe the globalization of war. It's a worldwide process of militarization, and it is a project which consists in transforming sovereign countries into territories. It is a war of conquest.
That is an extremely important subject to be covering, as I'm sure the listeners can appreciate. But as you say, the aspects of this global war is hidden in many ways from the public, so that people may be familiar with the concept of economic warfare in the current context, but are not so familiar with the military aspects, the military buildup, as it is not concentrated on in the establishment media to the same extent. In that regard, people might be surprised to hear of the imminent possibility of flashpoints towards nuclear war. And of course, this is something that you're attempting to draw attention to. Tell us about some of those flashpoints and how we could be drawn into nuclear conflict.
The threat of nuclear war is very serious, because in the wake of 9/11, the US administration redefined its nuclear doctrine. Essentially, it presented nuclear war as one among several avenues, to the extent that nuclear weapons can now be used in the conventional war theater alongside the Kalashnikov, so to speak. Because what happened that was in 2001, 2002, it was called the so-called Nuclear Posture Review. They defined a new nuclear doctrine stating that so-called mini-nukes, small nuclear weapons, are, quote, harmless to the surrounding civilian population because the explosion is underground. They were referring to bunker buster bombs. And consequently, small nuclear weapons, which are from 1/3 to 6 times the Hiroshima bomb, can be used, and they can be used preemptively. And that's very important. Preemptively means that we are using them as instruments of self-defense. And it's in that regard that I say that we're turning realities upside down. We're presenting war as a peacemaking undertaking. I mean, I'm saying we, the media, is presenting war as a peacemaking undertaking, going after Saddam Hussein or after Gaddafi, who have weapons of mass destruction, any kind of narrative which supports the wars of conquest. But now what is more serious is that they say, well, these nuclear weapons, they're not weapons of mass destruction. They're instruments of peace because they don't affect civilians. Of course, that's a bloody lie. And they get scientists to corroborate those statements. So we're in a very dangerous crossroads because ultimately, not only have we eliminated all the safeguards of the Cold War era, the hotline telephone between the Kremlin and the White House, but we have a breakdown in diplomacy. We have threats which are emanating from the White House on a daily basis, directed against Russia and China. We have a situation where our media is no longer recording objectively what's going on in the world, so that if there's there's a civil war in East Ukraine, which is led by neo-Nazi freedom fighters, they will deny that these are neo-Nazis. They are. They have it on their bloody uniforms. Now, I saw just a few days ago a report by Al Jazeera saying, reporting that these were freedom fighters, and they actually filled the freedom fighters, Ukrainian freedom fighters. I'm talking about those which are linked to the Ukrainian Kiev regime, and they had an SS emblem on their uniforms, and they appear on network television and are heralded as liberators. Okay, now that is the kind of media lies which are being perpetrated systematically. We have the case of Boko Haram in Nigeria, and that's another. That's what I call the globalization of war. We know, and it's amply documented, Boko Haram is an Al-Qaeda affiliated organization, which is supported covertly by central intelligence agencies and other Western intelligence organizations. And they are set loose in Nigeria with a view, ultimately, to destabilizing a sovereign nation state. And we have numerous examples. Al-Shabaab in Somalia has a similar mandate. It's the use of jihadist organizations to create havoc and destroy the fabric of sovereign countries. Now, more recently, we see Obama's global war on terrorism, which consists in going after the Islamic State, both within Syria and Iraq, when we know, and it's amply documented, that Islamic State is a creature of the US NATO military alliance, with the support of Israel, with the support of Saudi Arabia, trained and financed by the Western military alliance, and that the objective of going after the Islamic State is simply to confuse public opinion, because ultimately they're not bombing the Islamic State. They're bombing the country's infrastructure. They're bombing the country's institutions. They're destroying the fabric of society. And this is abundantly clear. If they had wanted to destroy the Islamic State, they could have done it when the Islamic State crossed the desert in their Toyota pickup trucks. It's a very simple operation. So that I think what this book attempts to do is, first of all, is to break the consensus that somehow war is a peacemaking undertaking, to present the long war. Okay, and that concept is not mine. The long war is a Pentagon concept. Is that America is waging a long war? Now it needs some kind of ideological justification, some pretext, and essentially what the U.S. War academies have chosen, and the various think tanks, is to wage the global war on terrorism and to go after the terrorists that we have actually created. Okay, so they create these terrorist organizations and then they go after them, and we can see it also in the economic arena how the United States is playing. I'm talking about Wall Street is playing a role in destabilizing the European economic fabric, so that all these issues are absolutely crucial. We can't understand military undertakings without understanding the concurrent process whereby these military undertakings are closely coordinated with a process of economic warfare, which consists not only in imposing sanctions on sovereign countries, but also in deliberate acts of destabilization of financial and currency markets, ultimately with a view to undermining the enemy's national economies. And that is what threatens humanity. It's not only the threat of nuclear war, it's also the threat of the installation of some kind of global police state apparatus, which accompanies the military project as well as the economic project, which is one of ultimately worldwide domination in the spheres of finance, banking, the oil and energy markets, the high-tech industries, and also, of course, agriculture with the imposition of genetically modified seeds worldwide. So that what this book examines is this interface between the economic dimensions on the one hand and the military, strategic, geopolitical dimensions on the other.
You paint a very vivid picture of not only the global war that we have covered in previous global research reports in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, here in East Asia, in Latin America, but also, of course, the total war that is taking place through the economic sphere, the food supply, as you mentioned, various other aspects, even the information space, of course, one of the key battlegrounds in which this war is being fought against the minds of the population worldwide. And as I say, we have covered the various aspects of this in previous GRTV reports, but I guess the question then becomes what is the answer to this? What do we do about this? And I note that the fourth part of your book is dedicated to reversing the tide of war and breaking the American Inquisition. Tell us, what are your thoughts about the ways that this war agenda can be deconstructed?
Well, I think the deconstruction of a war agenda requires a worldwide counter-propaganda campaign, that we can ultimately dismantle the propaganda apparatus which sustains the war agenda, because without it, they don't have a leg to stand on. Okay, they are war criminals in high office. They're involved in extensive human rights violations. They claim to be committed to democracy, but they have blood on their hands. Now, at the moment, those war criminals are walking free. Tony Blair received the Save the Children Award, for his contribution to world peace. Obama received a Nobel Prize. Okay, now what I say, they're no easy solutions, but if the truth prevails. The truth becomes a weapon which ultimately can reverse the tide. It's a very complex issue to address because it requires a tremendous movement across the land. It requires going after war criminals in high office, but essentially questioning their legitimacy. You don't reverse the tide by saying, President Obama, could you stop bombing Iraq? Okay, you don't do that. You actually, because then he'll say, well, we have to bomb Iraq because of the bad guys who are there, the terrorists, and the media will applaud. What you have to do is ultimately to question the legitimacy of these politicians in high office, as well as all those who support politicians in high office. The politicians in high office are proxies. Okay, so you have Wall Street, you have the oil companies, you have Monsanto, and so on. Of course, the military-industrial complex, the people who make the weapons, the so-called defense contractors are also part of that. Okay, and they overlap with Wall Street, with the Texas oil giants, and so on. So the United States and its allies are threatening humanity, and we have to undermine the propaganda campaign which sustains this agenda. But ultimately, the first step is to reveal the truth and undermine this consensus which now pervades that war is a humanitarian undertaking, that we have to have security against Muslims. I mean, this is throughout Western Europe. It's an ongoing, of course, I wouldn't say it's even a discussion. It's presented as something which has to be implemented. And what people in France don't realize in the wake of Charlie Hebdo is that their own government, the government of François Hollande, is providing funding and training to the terrorists in the Middle East, okay? In other words, to the Islamic State. There's the Western Military Alliance, NATO, initiated a process of recruitment of jihadists back in 2011. And this is something is so well documented. So if we manage to reveal to public opinion that these terrorists are supported, and we've ample documentation to that effect, they're supported by their own governments, well, the legitimacy of their own governments collapses like a deck of cards. And that's what we call counter-propaganda.
Professor Chossudovsky, where do people go for more information about this book or to purchase a copy?
Well, I would suggest visit our website at www.globalresearch.ca, or it is also on globalresearch.org. The book can be ordered online. It will shortly be available on Amazon as well as in bookstores across the United States. We now have a new procedure for sending books overseas. So anywhere in the world, you can order this book, and we hope to have an Asian edition, which is coming out shortly, so that we're trying to ensure a maximum distribution of this title to our readers. So www.globalresearch.ca on our website, and we are very much indebted to the relentless support of our readers over the years, which has enabled us to progress as a powerful voice in the realm of alternative media, presenting an alternative view to what you might be reading in the corporate media. And we very much thank you for your support.
For more on this story and other breaking news and current events, please go to globalresearch.ca. For more research and analysis by James Corbett, please go to corbettreport.com. The Center for Research on Globalization depends on your support. To purchase a book or DVD, or to make a donation, please visit globalresearch.ca today.